everyone, I'm Stanley Painter with Port TV, and I've been talking to True Crime Rocket Science.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So it's really ironic that today, in an article on Fox 5, they talk about trying to get into the mindset of Rex Heuermann and trying to get insight into his actions by speaking to prostitutes that were in touch with him. And of course, that is one way of getting into his mindset, but there's another way as well. And that is retracing his footsteps, walking literally the path that he took from when he exited the station from Long Island and where it sort of comes out into Manhattan, into the fabric of the city, and then following the route that he would take to his office on Fifth Avenue. That's not just what he did once or twice. It is a part, it was a pattern that he repeated each and every workday for months and years and possibly decades. And that does something to a person. That does inform someone's mindset in a very intimate way. And so we would arrive in Manhattan at this railway exit on 8th Avenue from Long Island, and then he'd make his way to his office. And that meant entering the fabric of the city at 8th Avenue and heading towards 5th Avenue. I walked it today. It's a pleasant 10 to 15 minute walk, slightly more than half a mile from start to finish. You might say, I don't need you to do that. You can see it on a map. You're not going to find anything that's not available on Google Maps. And I beg to differ, and I'll explain why. So first of all, it's a straight shot for the most part. There are no steep hills or dodgy bits. I'm confident the route that I took is the one that Heuermann must have taken, or very similar to it. And it's also likely that he walked it, unless he was late or pressed for time, or if it was raining, as it was today in Manhattan. Well, it was raining and I walked it anyway. From a map, you can actually see all you think you need to know in terms of the major landmarks in the area. Number one is undoubtedly the Empire State Building. It's one of the most famous buildings in architecture, probably one of the most famous buildings in the world, and arguably Manhattan's most famous skyscraper. It's also very emblematic of New York, in the same way that the Eiffel Tower is emblematic of Paris. It's got a lot of history behind it, and in that interview done with Rex Heuermann, one can see that he is a bit of a stickler for things like history. So it's no exaggeration to say that the first thing you see when you step out of the station is the Empire State Building, and it's basically there the whole time. It basically shoots out of the ground right beside Fifth Avenue. And bear in mind, Heuermann would be walking from 8th Avenue to 5th Avenue, and so he would be seeing it the whole way. And so it acts as a kind of a beacon for one of New York's most famous and expensive streets as well, Fifth Avenue. Walking from the station directly towards the Empire State means you're also heading directly towards Heuermann's office. So it's just unavoidable that your eyes would be on this tallest building. And today it was, its nose was sticking into the clouds. The Empire State Building exudes magnificence in the sense that it speaks of possibility and potential, and has done, it's an old building. It's older than, I think it was built about 103 years ago. It's older than most of the buildings around it, but then also taller than most of the buildings around it. And so it speaks of possibility and has spoken of possibility for decades. And so when I talk about magnificence, I'm talking about that quality of almost being generous and open-handed, that quality of magnanimity in suggesting that this is a place where possibilities abound, where potential can be reached. Before we get to the rest of this episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I'm going to be extending this discovery, this exploration of Heuermann's Commute by going on the train and heading to Long Island and going to Massapequa Park and seeing what it is like from that angle. So if you're interested in the Heuermann case and kind of a bit of a sense of what it's like on the ground, and you haven't subscribed, please do. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So the strange thing about the Empire State is, and it's only something you can appreciate when you're on the ground, when you're walking towards it. I mean, you're certainly not going to find this out on a map. Is it has the strange Mirage-like quality. I mean, you know how Mirage works. When you approach a Mirage, it keeps, as you approach it, it recedes. So you never quite get to it. And there's something strangely like that with the Empire State Building. It winks at you for the longest time from far away. But at a certain indiscernible point, the top of the building vanishes, and the building itself, as I say, like a mirage, seems to disappear into the fabric of all the other glass and steel skyscrapers. And then so you've sort of tracking this beacon, and then just as you sort of get to it, you lose it, and then you do feel a little disoriented, you do feel a little lost. So as I say, you walk to it, you're seeing it, and then as you're about to reach it, it somehow eludes you. You sort of look up, and you can now no longer see the iconic top of that building. You sort of lose the summit of it. The second thing that's revealed on Google Street Maps is Macys. New York's Macys is the world's largest department store, and you know that's the thing you can't really appreciate unless you're there. It's a large department store, but until you walk by it and you look into its windows and you hear the things going on inside the store, some of it is played into the streets, and you get a sense of who's going into Macys and who's coming out. You get a sense of the huge signs advertising the store outside. You know, it's got a huge red star. And so you've got this big star, you know, advertising Macys, and then not far from that you've got this incredible tower of the Empire State. It's not just that these things are there. When you are there, you realize the scale of this. You know that this is a place where you have some of the world's largest stores, the world's tallest buildings, and so you would also imagine the people who live here are in some way superlatives, right? That there's something about if the people that are here created such superlatives in terms of buildings and design, then surely the people themselves are superlative in some way, which means to have an exaggerated or hyperbolical expression of praise, right? And so what happens if you come in, you don't really feel that about yourself? You know, what is super about oneself? Because that is what this environment is asking of you. You know, what do you have to offer? What is great about you? Now, on my walk, just like the station, I was able to frame Macys' entrance on 34th Avenue with the World Trade Center behind it in the same photo. But these are just elements that you can find on a map. So what's the point in actually going there? Well, as I'm trying to sort of convey to you guys, the Empire State is quite something to behold in person. It's so tall, it actually pierces the clouds on a rainy day. And I think in New York, in the entire city, the number of buildings that can do that, you can probably count on one hand. Walking in Heuermann's footsteps, one has a real sense of the scale of the symbol he approached every day, the symbol that he walked towards every single day and walked away from when he went home every single evening. And the fact is, as immensely impressive as the Empire State was, as an architect, not even in Manhattan, but anywhere, Heuermann wasn't terribly impressive as a man, as a businessman, or as an architect. And he's in a theater that is terribly impressive. And so that's going to expose you, that's going to expose the the gap, the schism between who you are and I guess who the people are in this area and perhaps who you wanted to be. And what happens when you want to be someone but you just aren't that person? Well, you feel feelings of frustration, you feel feelings of impotency, you feel feelings of helplessness and powerless. But it's not a one day, one feeling deal. It's a daily, monthly, yearly, decades long feeling of just not, like not gaining any traction. And so if he had Empire State aspirations, he was nevertheless doing the dog's body work when it comes to jobs in the city, as this tweet below confirms. I think it's dated June 5th, 2023. What was Rex Heuermann doing? What sort of work was he doing? Well, he had personally visited and pitched to replace a boiler. And I think his signature below that document speaks more authentically of, I think, how he really thought of himself. It's a very small signature. It speaks of a small fish in a very, very, very big and very deep pond. Empire State and Macys are both large in scale and scope. They exude power by virtue of their physical size and reputation, much as Manhattan does. Meanwhile, Heuermann's original office on West 36th, that's the one that's 300 feet from that hotel I stayed in June and April, right? Remember that? That office and that office building is a lot like Heuermann and his signature. So small and nondescript in these surroundings as to be practically invisible. And one's got to emphasize that. One's got to emphasize these surroundings to get a sense of the scale difference, the scale dichotomy, in terms of one thing being incredibly large and impressive and stupendous and incredible and all those superlatives, and the other thing being small and dull and not particularly impressive at all. And so it's hard to come to a place like Manhattan and not be challenged in some way, not to compare yourself to others who work and live here. You kind of feel like they are gods amongst men in a sense, and not to feel in some way insecure or inadequate. If Midtown Manhattan is exciting and vertiginous, you might not necessarily feel the shadow of that insecurity. But heading to the gentrified neighborhoods further south, as I did on my first night here in New York, when I went to places like Chelsea, and that's where Manhattanites live. Anderson Cooper lives in that area, a couple of movie stars like Christian Bale and Edward Norton. Well, you very soon get the sense that you don't belong here. Or put it this way, even if you felt you did belong, or even if you felt you wanted to belong, well, most people simply couldn't afford it, including Heuermann, which is why he lived where he did in a house as uninspiring and invisible as his office. And that is how, in a sense, freedom can feel very crushing, where no one is stopping you from living wherever you want to in the world. But, of course, can you afford it? And so there are limits, there are practical limits to what you may want to do. And those practical limits can be very dispiriting, humiliating, embarrassing, the source of anxiety and feelings of inadequacy. It's not fair. You can stay I want to, but I can't kind of thing. And so if Heuermann did commit these crimes, wasn't it because of a daily sense of being crushed by the expectations and anticipations of a world he walked through? But who was responsible for those expectations? Who was the source of those anticipations? Who was coming up with those feelings of, I want to be part of this, right? And yet he wasn't really part of it. Even working as an architect, he wasn't really architecting in Manhattan in the sense of the word that you would think would make sense. Imagine being an architect in the greatest architectural theater in the world, and you're not designing cloud gouging towers, but instead you're replacing boilers. Imagine the cloying sense of powerless and impotency, knowing that that is the case. You're also not even doing architecture, you're sort of providing consultancy work for what's in the rule books, and what are the certain codes. Not even really creating anything real. You are just dealing with an admin, which is even more dull. So I think the lesson one learns from this little walkabout is that dreaming an unrealistic dream is like volunteering to be in your own nightmare. And the only person you're really fooling is yourself. And it's not a small little thing that's at stake here. The longer you get caught up in this unrealistic dream, the greater the cost is going to be, right? There's a cost to dedicating one's life to unrealistic fairy tales. And guess what? Someone ends up paying for it. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.